Hello everybody, happy lunchtime. Welcome to today's Urban Design Group session, Women in the Public Realm. Thank you to everyone for being here. I'm Hannah Smart, Chair-elect of the Urban Design Group and Founder-Director of Edge Urban Design. And it's our pleasure today to introduce our speaker, Constance Desenfant, who brings with her rigorous academic research and a substantial amount of professional experience to pose questions today of inclusivity, safety, and lived experience in the public realm. Constance is an associate urban designer with WW+P Architects in London. She studied architecture in France at the Nantes School of Architecture and in Spain at the Valencia Polytechnic University, before moving to London in 2015. And since then, she has worked extensively on major infrastructure and master planning projects with WW+P. Alongside her professional practice, Constance is completing a part-time PhD at the Bartlett School of Architecture. Her doctoral research investigates how the form and structure of the built environment influence women's perceptions and experiences of public space. And by combining spatial and sensorial analysis with both qualitative and quantitative approaches, that was a long sentence, she examines not only the intended function of spaces, but also how they are lived, felt, and used in everyday life. Constance contributes actively to the wider discourse on design. She served as feature editor for Design Exchange magazine and was invited to teach and take part in panels at universities including Nottingham, London Metropolitan, and Paris Malaquais. And she's challenging me today with lots of French words, remembering my French A-level. Her work is especially relevant to today's discussion as it draws attention to beyond the city centre to suburban and peri-urban contexts, where public spaces can be less dense, less programmed, and where questions of safety, accessibility, and inclusion are often heightened. And in fact, we've just been talking beforehand also about the rural context and what it's like in a kind of more countryside setting. Constance's research offers valuable insight into how design decisions, both at the local scale and across wider networks, shape not only patterns of use, but also the perceptions, feelings, and lived experiences of diverse users. So that's enough from me. And without further ado, please join me in welcoming Constance Desenfant. Over to you, Constance.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much, Hannah, for the lovely introduction. It's great to be online with you all today. So as Hannah mentioned, I'm Constance. I'm currently in the process of completing my PhD at UCL, while also working as an associate urban designer at WW+P Architects. Today, I'm going to share a little bit about my research, which looks at how women experience public spaces, especially residential areas that aren't in the city center. More specifically, I'm exploring how fear plays a role in how women navigate these spaces and how that fear might be linked to the way the built environment is designed. So my work brings together ideas from feminist geography, urban morphology, and spatial analysis. I'm trying to look at everyday's experiences, so things that aren't always planned or obvious, and how they shape our perception of spaces. So the aim is to offer new ways of thinking about public space design from a gendered perspective, and hopefully to help make cities feel safer and more inclusive for women. So first, let's take a step back for a moment. So historically, public spaces have been dominated by male, places for politics, business, social life, while women were often expected to stay in the private domestic sphere. And even today, most cities are still designed by men, which means that they often don't fully consider the needs for women, children, older people, disabled individuals, or migrants. So my research focuses on women's experiences in these public spaces, and it basically asks how can we make these spaces more welcoming, more inclusive, and better suited to everyone. Beyond just feeling excluded, women also face real safety challenges in cities. So a recent survey from UN Women UK found that over 80% of young women in the UK have experienced sexual harassment. For women aged between 18 and 24, that number jumps to 86%. So the most common places where this happens, on streets, in nighttime venues, and on public transport. So these numbers are quite shocking, and they've sparked a call for a change, both in policy and in law. Over the past few decades, the issue of women's safety in cities has gained global attention. Researchers in gender studies and feminist geography have been working hard to understand the root causes and suggest solutions. But while social change can take time, changes to the physical environment, like how we design streets, parks, and housing, can happen more quickly. So that's why it's so important to figure out which aspect of urban design affect how safe women feel. It's not a complete fix, but it's a powerful step towards making cities more empowering and inclusive for women. First, let's dive into the literature behind this research. So to start, I looked at the theories and methods that helped to frame the study. So there's a lot of work out there on how women experience cities, especially when it comes to fear and safety in public spaces. Method-wise, I'm combining spatial analysis with qualitative approaches. So not just looking at maps and layouts, but also listening to how people actually feel and move through these environments. One of the first big themes is fear and safety. So what makes people feel unsafe, how that fear shows up, and who's mostly affected. So this topic crosses over into psychology, geography, urban design, and planning. And some of the key thinkers, so like Jane Jacob, Oscar Newman, or Jay Appleton, really shaped how we understand safety in cities. They talked about things like having active, lively streets where people naturally look out for each other, and spaces that strike a balance between being open and offering shelter. Their ideas help spark more research into how the design of a space can influence how safe people feel. More recently, urban designers like Carmona or Gell took a closer look at public spaces from a design and historical angle. They found that suburban residential areas often lack the activities and features that makes places feel safe. These quiet, underused spaces can actually make people feel more vulnerable. Dimen and Ceccato added another layer by pointing out that even in areas with low crime, people, especially women, can still feel unsafe. This shows that it's not just about actual danger, it's also about how spaces are perceived. That's why my research focuses on movement, how people walk through spaces rather than just where they sit or gather. And I'm especially interested in residential public spaces outside of city centers, which often get overlooked, but are key to everyday life. So gender plays a big role in how safety is experienced. Studies show that women, especially those aged between 18 and 35, tend to feel more fear in public space, mostly because of the threat of sexual violence. Researchers like Lisbon or Valentine found that people feel safer when they're around others or near buildings. Certain layouts help create this feeling of co-presence, so when you're not alone and there's a sense of informal social control, which is really important for women's sense of safety. All these insights come together to form the backbone of my study. So the tables here sum up the key spatial and social factors that influence how safe women feel. Even though the theories come from different disciplines, they all seem to agree on one thing, that having people and buildings around us make us feel safer. To analyze all this, I'm using a mix of tools from urban design and spatial analysis methods. So one of them is the space syntax theory and methodology, which aims to link a layout of a space to how people actually use it. So Hillier and Hansen's work from the 1980s introduced actual maps to show how visibility and connectivity affect movement. Later, segment maps refine this by measuring how integrated different parts of the cities are. So basically, how easy it is to get from one place to another and how that encourage people to be present in those spaces. Urban morphology also offers useful tools to analyze spaces. So instead of just looking at how dense an area is, researchers like Pont and Haupt created a matrix of variables, like how much space buildings take up, how dense a street network is. And then Dovey and Pavka also added concepts like street life density to capture the social spatial dynamic of a place. Together, all these spatial metrics help us to measure the more qualitative aspects of urban design, like how safe a space feels, not just to look at it on paper. And then finally, to wrap up the literature review part, I looked into how researchers actually study people's experience in cities. So especially how they perceive and move through urban spaces. So there are some really interesting methods. First, interviews, which help to understand how people feel about safety, accessibility, and social life in their neighborhoods. And then we also have participatory mapping, which lets locals share their knowledge and how they use different spaces. There's also experiential walks, which are great for capturing the sensory and social feel of a place, like how it smells, sounds, or how people interact. And then some studies also use wearable devices like sensors that track movement, eye gaze, or physical reactions, and that help to link what people feel in their body to the layout of a space around them. All of these approaches help us to understand how urban spaces are actually lived and felt, and I carefully considered them when designing my own research methods. So bringing it all together, so the theories and the methodology introduced. So my study is based on a key idea or hypothesis that urban layouts which encourage density and people being present together, so what we call co-presence, can help women feel safer. To test this, I break down the physical and social aspects of a space into smaller variables grouped into 4 categories. The first, network characteristics, so how connected and accessible the streets and the spaces are. Then virtual community, how many people are present in a space and how likely they are to meet each other. Then massing and density, so the shape and the size of the buildings. And then embodied vision, so how people visually experience the space. Each case study is selected, is analyzed using these metrics, and then I compare those findings with real-life feedback from participants. So using both quantitative and qualitative data collection methods to see how well the predictions match up with how women actually feel in those spaces. So the framework I just talked about helps to identify a whole range of design and layout features that can affect how safe women feel in public spaces. It's about looking at the built environment in detail and asking what makes the space feel secure or not. To make this practical, I've turned those features into measurable indicators, what we call metrics. Some of these are adapted from well-known methods used in urban design, morphology, or spatial analysis, and others I've developed specifically for this research. By calculating these metrics for each site, I'm aiming to predict how safe a space might feel for women. So these metrics work at different scales. Some help to describe the whole space, while others change depending on where the person is standing or working in that space. So to capture this, I use 3 types of spatial units. So first, the whole space. So that gives us 6 broad metrics for the entire space, which I listed here. Then convex spaces, which is a bit more complex. So basically these break the areas into smaller and discrete zones, and they can be described as the biggest possible space where you can draw a line between any 2 points without crossing outside the boundary. So basically from any point in that convex space, you can see the whole convex space. There's no hidden corner. And that helps to measure things more precisely, and especially in spaces that have irregular shapes. And then finally, on the right, 3 by 3 meter grid cell. So these are used for metrics that vary across the space, like visibility metrics. Now I'll walk you through the 4 main groups of metrics and how they're calculated. Oops. So first, the network accessibility, so how easy it is to get around. So this group uses ideas from space syntax theory to measure things like integration, so how connected a space is to the wider area, choice, how likely it is to be part of a route people take, connectivity, how many paths link to that space, and then intelligibility, so how easy it is to understand and navigate. This helps us figure out how accessible and inviting a space is for movement. Okay, then the next one is virtual community. So basically how lively or socially active a space is, because as I mentioned before, having people around can make people feel safer. So the four metrics are the degree of overlooking. So this one is inspired by James Jacob theory, eyes on the streets. It measures how much of the space is watched by nearby buildings. So for this, I basically calculate the degree of transparency or glazing of each facade surrounding the open space. Then the neighborliness score, which is also based on someone's work, so Julian Anson's work, and which looks at how likely residents are to bump into each other based on the number of entrances that open onto a shared open space. Then the walkability score, which I defined for the purpose of this study, and basically try to describe how close the space is to local centers and transport hubs, and that basically affects how many people will tend to walk around an area. And then the last one in that group is the amenity score, which I also defined for this study, and looks at things that encourage people to stay or dwell in spaces, like benches, greenery, and playgrounds, but also considers barriers like fences that might discourage use. So together, all these four metrics show how vibrant or socially engaging a space might be, which is key for feeling safe. Oop. Next slide. The next group is density and enclosure. So how enclosed or exposed space feels. So for this, I also have four metrics. So the ground space index and the floor space index, which are standard measures of building density, are used in urban morphology. Then we have the vertical enclosure, which is the ratio between the building height and the space width. So basically a balanced ratio of 1 feels enclosed but not too overwhelming, a little bit like a square. Then the horizontal enclosure, so how much the space is surrounded by buildings or connected streets, or the width of the escape route within an open space. So that helps us understand whether the space feels protected or too open. And then finally, the last group, embodied vision, looks at how people visually experience a space as they move through it. So for this, I use eyes of theory and visibility graph analysis, and I calculate first the eyes of compactness, so how tight or spread out the visible area is, the visual integration, how visually connected the space is to other spaces, visual control, how much control someone has over what they can see, and then visual entropy, how complex or unpredictable the visual environment is. These visual metrics are all calculated based on grid cells and the relationship between each cell based on the spatial and geometric configuration of the space. They play a big role in how safe a space feels, whether it's clear and open or confusing and hard to read. Okay, now we're moving into the second phase of the study, so the field work. This is where, after assessing the spaces and what we could call their expected safety performance on paper, I test the theory in real-life settings and see how well the predictions hold up. So for this, I used multiple case studies. This helped me to compare different types of spaces and understand how their design affects how women feel and behave in them. While spatial characteristics can be measured using spatial analysis tools and metrics, the experience of space is personal and subjective. So to capture that, I combine quantitative data like heart rate and movement with qualitative methods like interviews and questionnaires. That helps paint a fuller picture of how women actually experience these spaces. So the study focuses on a specific group, women aged between 18 and 35, and a specific type of spaces. So pedestrianized residential open space in suburban London that people use as through routes. So they can't really be dead end. I chose 3 areas, which are shown here. So like Roman Road, which is made up of residential council estates from the 60s and the 70s. Then Milan South, south of Milan Station, which is made up of regenerated estates with newer infill housing, and then Stratford East Village with more recent private developments. So each area includes 3 open space, giving a good mix of layouts and design types. To keep things fair and unbiased, participants were assigned to areas they didn't know, and I only run sessions during weekday lunchtime when activity levels are steady and it's safe for everyone. So I couldn't conduct the experiments at night. So in total, 45 women took part, so 15 in each area. This setup allowed me to look at how both the design of the space and the background of the participants influenced their experience. The fieldwork started with some basic observations, like counting how many people passed through the spaces or tracking movement patterns. And then each participant did a structured walk through the space wearing a smartwatch that recorded their location and heart rate. After the walk, we had a walking interview, and they filled out a questionnaire in each space. So this mix of method helped me to understand not just the way they felt, but also where and why they felt it. So this is how it worked in practice. So participants followed a mapped route through the 3 spaces on their own, wearing a Garmin smartwatch, tracked their heart rate and location using the smartwatch. And that helped me to spot any physiological reactions like spike in stress that might be linked to specific features of the space. Meanwhile, I was observing from a distance, noting things like body language or sudden events like a loud noise or an unexpected encounter that might explain those reactions. After the walk, we were working back together while recording a walking interview, and they were filling out questionnaires for each spaces. They rated the space from a 0 to 5 scale and marked spots they found safe and unsafe on a map. This helped to identify what parts of the space triggered comfort or discomfort, safety or unsafety. As part of the methodology development, I tested various biometric devices, some more complex than others, both in terms of how they operate and how the data is processed. And the Garmin smartwatch turned out to be a good compromise. It gave me reliable, time-stamped data that worked really well for outdoor movement-based research. And then by combining the physiological data with personal feedback, I was able to get a much better understanding of how urban design affects women's sense of safety in everyday space. Whoops. So overall, I collected responses from 45 participants, which included both the questionnaires and the walking interviews. So that's for the qualitative data. So these were transcribed and then analyzed using 2 tools. So in Envivo to do the coding of the interview and identifying themes in the interviews. And then Excel to link responses to specific locations using timestamps. And then I mapped those in QGIS. I started with a deductive approach, so looking for patterns based on themes that I expected, like how layout or connectivity affect perceptions. And then I moved into an inductive phase of analysis of the interviews, where new themes emerge organically from the data. To visualize the results, I created some thematic heat maps, where each of the main themes were showing how specific perception varied across the 3 case studies area and how people responded differently to different contexts. In terms of the quantitative data collected, that gave me quite a rich location-based view on how women experience different urban environments. So the data included the heart rate data recorded every second during the walk, the GPS trace of the participants showing where they walked and when, the perception data, so where participants marked safe and unsafe spots on maps, and then demographics like age, ethnicity, occupation that are collected through the questionnaires, and then experiential ratings, so the scores from 0 to 5 on things like safety, comfort, control, and how easy the space was to navigate. To make sense of all this data collected, I started by analyzing first the demographics and space ratings in Excel. So I looked at how different spaces performed across 4 key criteria, so comfort, control, safety, and navigability. So I calculated averages, minimums, and maximums for each space and visualized them using box plot and 4 axis graphs, as shown here. Then I compared these results with the spatial analysis to see how well people's perception matched the actual design features or what the expected safety performance of each space was. Next, I processed the smartwatch data. So I converted the file into a format that could be used in QGIS and mapped the heart rate readings along each walking route using sampling points every 5 meters. So each point was given an average heart rate based on the heart rate data of all the participants within the 2.5 meters radius, which helped to highlight stress responses along the routes. I also traced the safe and unsafe hotspots participants drew on their maps. So I color-coded them and assigned values. So 1 + 1 for safe and -1 for unsafe, which gave me the maps at the bottom here. So these were then matched with grid cells to visualize how safety was perceived across each space. And this data could then be paired with visibility metrics, which were also calculated for each grid cell. Before diving into the stats, I combined all the data sets, so the spatial, physiological, and perception-based data at 3 different scales. So first, at the whole space level, where I paired like spatial metrics like walkability or ground space index, which I introduced earlier, with perception scores for each of the 9 open spaces. So that helped me to compare predicted and actual feelings of safety and comfort. Then at the scale of the convex space level, so for each smaller space, I was analyzing using the metrics like integration or degree of overlooking, which also I introduced earlier. And I paired those with the average safety scores and heart rate data processed at this scale. That's what you can see in the middle. That's the heart rate for each convex space, the average one. And then at the grid cell level, here I matched the visual metrics, like the either-vis compactness, the visual integration, with perception and physiological responses. So these dataset were much more detailed with 130 to 170 values per areas, which allowed for like quite good statistical analysis. I then run descriptive statistic to assess stress levels and then ANOVA test to check if demographics like age or ethnicity affected heart rate. I also used linear regression to explore the link between heart rate and walking speed. To understand how spatial feature related to perception, I run correlation tests and multivariate regressions across all scales. I'm not going to present the results of the statistical analysis today. They will be published later in the year in a paper, so you can read that. But I wanted this presentation to be more about the methodology developed than about the results. I also wanted to highlight how much information and potential solutions can be hidden in everyday spaces and their ability to make people feel safer. So this study intends to describe and analyze residential open space at a detailed and fine-grained level. And what I found is that small changes to the built environment can go a long way when it comes to safety. So adding benches or landscape features can encourage people to spend more time in those spaces, making sure the spaces are overlooked and the escape routes are wide enough, understanding how the spaces relates to their surrounding network or what good visibility means. All these things are key and need to be taken into account when designing public spaces. So hopefully this wasn't too technical and will make you want to find out more about this study, which I think can become a great tool to guide designers and planners when assessing open spaces and deciding what is the best spatial configuration to generate positive perceptions. So overall, the idea of this presentation was to introduce a framework that gives a robust way to understand how urban design influence feelings of fear and safety by combining what people feel, what their bodies show, and how the space is actually designed. One of the most important parts of this methodology is how everything comes together spatially using QGIS. So I was able to map interview themes directly onto the urban layout. So when participants talked about feeling safe or comfortable, I could pinpoint exactly where those feelings were happening. And this level of detail really helped me to show how the same type of space were interpreted differently depending on the area. I also layered in the safety ratings and physiological data using a grid cell system, which allowed me to run statistical tests against visibility and other spatial features. what the findings show is that feeling safe isn't just about crime stat or CCTV. It's also about how understandable, socially active, and well-designed a space is. So things like constitutedness, so how likely you are to bump into your neighbors, visual control, how much of the space you can see, and walkability, how connected the space is to everyday destinations. These all turn out to be strong indicator of perceived safety. Beyond the data, I think this study offers a replicable framework for future research. So it's a tool that can be used to explore how urban design affects emotional and sensory experiences, not just for women, but for any group whose access to public space might be limited or shaped by fear. And personally, I'm really interested to see where this work can be taken. So at WW+P Architects, we're always looking into ways to make the projects we design more inclusive and accessible to all. And as an urban designer, I'm really excited at the idea of incorporating some of these research findings into practice. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Constance. That's incredible. What a huge amount of work that you've done. No doubt you're still doing as well.
Yeah, the best part of the last 7 years.
Do you feel, is this just scratching the surface in terms of what you've been thinking about?
Yeah, it's hard to condense everything in a presentation because there's so much work behind it.
Yeah, I don't know how you remembered all of that. Amazing. Thank you. Really great. We have got loads of questions, and I think what's also lovely is everybody seems to be sharing different reports and podcasts and books on the subject. So it's obviously something that's, very important to lots of us. I wonder if anyone would like to pose some questions. So I'm just going to go back to the start. Sophia Hotch, are you here? Did you want to tell us about your thesis and space syntax?
Oh, sure. Do you hear me? I'm in a cafe, so I might
Yeah, we
be a
can hear
little bit
you.
loudy.
Yeah, of
Yeah,
course.
okay, great.
Go for it.
Okay, great. Yeah, my thesis was in 2018, if I'm not mistaken, so quite some years ago. But it's a similar topic. I based my studies on space syntax on women, and specifically in Soho. And I also worked with PJIS, mapping all the sexual offenses that have happened in roads. So I think what I discovered was that the streets that are one step away from the main street are the ones where these cases are happening. And that was like my contribution to the topic. So I think it could also be some help because I did a little bit of, well, quite some global studies on perception of safety internationally and with some surveys. So I think if you have not had the chance to check my thesis, I think would be of help. And I
Yeah,
think it's, yeah. Have you
yeah,
seen
no,
it already? Maybe?
I came across your research, and I
Okay,
feel like I've kind of incorporated into my literature review because the fact that public space need to be a step away from Main Street is definitely one of the criteria and one of the metrics that I'm looking at, like in terms of the connectivity and accessibility of the spaces.
great. Okay.
So yeah, I
Look
think it's a
forward to
really
see this
interesting
one.
piece of work. Yeah,
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. If you need something else, just reach
yeah,
out. I'm happy to help.
great.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you, Sophia. That's really lovely. I just also, right at the start of the chat, quite a few people were asking if it was possible to get hold of your presentation, Constance, and I'll answer that one for you, that you're still working on it.
Yeah, I'll have to think about it. Maybe when my PhD is finished.
That would be great.
Yeah.
It's only fair to let you finish it, I think. Hannah Bauman, did you want to ask your question if you're still here?
Yes. Yeah, so thank you for that. That was really interesting, Constance. When I've worked on this topic with local authorities and policymakers, they often distinguish between actual safety or unsafety and perceptions, women's perception of safety and unsafety. And I personally have some issues with that, but I was wondering if you came across that, if you've theorized that in your work, how you deal with that kind of distinction. And yeah, thanks.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, that's a distinction I made right from the start because when you look at stats, they don't always reflect what people feel like, especially if you look at only at crime stats for women, that would probably be mostly in city centers because of the probability, like because you have more people in city centers, so the probability of crime is more important than in suburban spaces. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't look at suburban spaces in terms of the perceived safety. And I did work a little bit with Tower Hamlet Local Authority, who were doing a study which was kind of overlapping with my case study, so it was quite interesting. But again, they were focusing on crime and reporting crime and addressing crime rather than perceptions. So that's where I kind of shifted a little bit. So yeah.
Maybe if you don't mind me adding something to that, I think it's, yeah, the perception in and of itself is so important from my point of view, because it delimits who can take part in the city and how people participate. And even if there wasn't an actual attack, we don't need to wait until sort of a crime that is recorded somewhere, right? When people feel unsafe, it means they take less part and they have less access to resources. So I think this is really important research. So thank you.
Yeah, and I think that's something we touched on really quickly with Hannah before the talk. You know, for women, it's so important. Like anytime you walk home or you go out in the evening, you think about the route you're going to take. And so many times, some of us use this kind of avoidance strategy and like take longer routes because they're safer. And that's something that I've paid attention early on when I moved to London, like thinking about like why wouldn't I take this route? It's because there's like lots of blind walls, it's quite dark, there's some like hidden corners. So like all these things are like part of the built environment, and there's stuff that we can address to make women feel safer and like, you know, avoid taking these longer routes and go through the high street because it's lit up and there's more traffic. So yeah, that's basically where my research comes from as well.
Thank you, Hannah, for those questions. That's great. Cameron, Abby, would you like to ask your question? I can't see if Cameron's still on the call or not. But I'll ask the question, Constance. Not all planning officers study urban design, thus possibly don't take into account how women and all users of a space may feel due to the design of a place as a result of their decision. How many planning officers can walk through a space and identify problems? If they do not know about the problems, they cannot spot them. I wonder if it'd be helpful if more local authorities had more in-house urban designers and architects to spot potential vulnerabilities in master plans and proposals.
Yeah, that's a good comment as well. It's interesting because within my 45 participants, a lot of them had an architectural or urban design background, which really helped to like find specific characteristic of the environment that were relevant to the study. And I feel like broadening the background of the participant would have maybe be better in terms of like diversity, but also maybe detrimental in terms of like getting all these insights from professionals. So yeah, I mean, I think definitely urban designers should be more involved in planning policy. Yeah, I 100% agree.
Definitely agree, especially on behalf of the Urban Design Group. Kerry Moriarty, you have asked a couple of questions in response to that point. If you're still here, I don't know whether you wanted to add anything to that. Lots of great information that you've added there.
Hi, apologies, my microphone's not working, so apologies if it's a bit noisy. Not really questions, just adding, you know, a couple of people were asking about specific areas of research and particular questions around whether the impact on fear and the perception of fear and safety impacts on the propensity to exercise in the open air, and also on the impact of smell, which, as I mentioned in the comments, was something I actually wanted to do my PhD on, but couldn't find a supervisor. And it actually was researched by my late great friend Vicky Henshaw, who wrote a book about that very topic.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite interesting. I also, when I got into my PhD before, I was really interested in smell and sound, in how that affects women and their use of the city. Like, I just noticed that I lived next to a primary school, and like the sound of children made me feel more comfortable and like more safe, and how like these different sounds can really contribute to your experience of the city. So I think the smell is quite similar, but you can only probably do one PhD in your life, so that will be mine.
Lovely, thank you for that, Kerry. Juliet Amoruso, if I pronounced that properly, you're just telling us a little bit there about Glasgow. It'd be great to hear that from you.
Hi, yeah. No, it was a bit more. Can you hear me?
Yes.
It's a bit more of a comment in response to a couple of other people and the presentation, which was great. Thank you, Constance. It was just kind of that we're from a Glasgow City Council perspective, we're trying to put some of these kind of theories into practice right now at the moment. So it's pretty prominent, but specifically through public engagement. So essentially in 2022, Glasgow City Council passed a motion to integrate feminist urbanism into policy. So we've got it in our kind of national policy in Scotland, and then Glasgow are trying to embed it into their kind of more local policy, which is fantastic. And we're kind of thinking about how do we do this? We don't have a specific metric, so some of that information was really useful, but we would like to try and develop a kind of toolkit. But from our perspective, it's a lot about engaging with different groups. So we have a site in Glasgow, for instance. It's a new public space within the kind of city centre, but on a river, and we've worked with kind of school children, so 60 female school teenagers, and we've also kind of looked at some work with some other female organisations recently, and although a lot of it is about fear, we kind of spoke to them more about why they don't feel like they belong in the space. So that was quite interesting, and getting a kind of more qualitative perspective. And we are hoping to take quite a lot of their kind of feedback on board in our next stages of our kind of master plan. And a lot of it does come down to urban design and lighting and kind of art and public space and landscape, etc. So very relevant, but just as a kind of case study if you're interested, as it seems to match up.
Yeah, no, it's great to hear that Glasgow is doing so many things, and especially that they're doing it with like public engagement, because as we mentioned before, if public authorities only based their policies on stats, then it doesn't really relate to how people actually feel. So talking to different groups is super relevant. And then one of the things I've always thought about cities is like, if we were all designing cities for children, like playful and colorful, I'm sure like the whole of the population would feel more comfortable. I don't know why we don't embed like some of this thinking more into policy and design, because it can make such a big difference. And you can see it like in cities where they've done some small interventions with like, I don't know, colorful pedestrian crossings or like artworks on buildings or murals. It changes a lot how the space feels, but also how people interact with the space. So I think it's all good things to take on board. But and as you mentioned, Juliet, I think we need some sort of a toolkit for local authorities who don't always have the tools to implement things. So that's something I'd be really interested into getting when I finish my PhD.
Thank you, that's great. Can I just ask, we've got 15 minutes left and we'll do some more questions, but just as a little bit of a test, if everyone could go to their React button, and it would just be really interesting to know if you think it would be good for the Urban Design Group to create some kind of working group or a place for resources, or to kind of carry on this conversation on this general topic. Perhaps just raise your hand, just to kind of get a feel for if that would be of interest. Okay, I thought it might be. Cool, that's lovely. Please still keep putting your hand up, and you can put them back down again. That's also great. So let's just have a look at some other questions. We've got a lovely podcast shared there from Lauren. I haven't listened to that one, so I'll put that on my list. Emily, you've got a comment here about difference between men and women. If there's anything you'd like to ask on that one, Emily Hubble. Otherwise, I'll just carry on going down. Nick, great study. Nick, are you here? Is there a question you'd like to ask?
Yeah, no, I thought it was brilliant and really important. I was just wondering about sort of, although they sort of might be called confounding factors, but things like litter and the maintenance of the space and its sort of perceived wealth and prosperity, can I imagine sort of change a perception of safety quite radically. How were these accounted for, or those kinds of factors that because the case study spaces might have been different in terms of the area prosperity.
Yeah, definitely. That's a good point also, because the 3 case studies areas I chose were quite different between council estates or recent developments that are more maintained with like the proper maintenance team. I have, I think, one of these diagrams. Yeah, this diagram is what came out of the interviews. So that's definitely something that was picked up in the interviews in terms of maintenance is somewhere here. People in place, maintenance. That's one of the themes that came out a lot during the interviews. Like if there's lots of litter around, or like some bikes with their locks broken, or lack of maintenance in the space, that really affected how women felt less safe. But obviously it's not something that urban designer can change. I don't know if it's even like for planning policy to address, because some of the times, it's for the council if it's a council estate, but sometimes it's just private developers or even just human behaviors. Like people just have to behave and put things in bins. So it's definitely something that contributes. But as urban designers or planners, it's more difficult to address, except from everyone trying to keep their city tidy and clean.
Brilliant, thank you. Emma McMullen, are you here? Would you like to ask your question?
Hi, yes. So the previous person sort of asked some of that question, because when I left London and moved to Winchester, one of the things that I noticed was that Winchester was very clean and tidy compared to London, but people made an awful lot more fuss about it, and and I had a lot of elderly neighbours at the time, and they were very worried about any litter anywhere, because they immediately felt kind of as though their city was changing, and as though crime was really rife, because some kid had dropped a crisp packet. And so it was perception of crime through amount of litter, but it was specifically in relation to older people who really were very hot on that. And so my question kind of extends from that, and just wondered whether any of the people that participated in your research were older people and or disabled people, because I think they have very different experiences of the urban realm.
Unfortunately, my research focused on women between 18 and 35, so it wasn't including any older people. And I didn't get any participant who had a disability, but it would have been interesting to include. But unfortunately, we can't really look at everything at the same time. I had to look at it through the lens of a specific group to be able to have results. And
I understand that, and so then that kind of creates an opportunity for somebody to look at those, because I know some disabled people who've been very badly attacked in London because they're in a wheelchair, so it would be good to see which kind of places are better and more comfortable and less stressful.
I think it's super interesting. It would be super interesting to look at that, and that's also what my research is trying to do, is to create a tool that can be applied to different groups afterwards. Because I'm super conscious that for disabled people, for example, people in wheelchairs, the question of accessibility and step-free access. If you don't feel like you can escape quickly from a place because there's steps, and you can't physically do it, it makes you much more scared. So there's other characteristics to take into account, like level changes and stuff that weren't picked up in the study because it was focusing on women. But yeah, the
Exactly,
idea would
yeah.
be like, yeah, to develop some sort of a toolkit or a framework that can be used for different groups. And yeah, I'd be super interested in looking at other groups like children, yeah, migrants, disabled people, or older people. Yeah.
Fantastic, thank you.
Lovely, thank you for that. Barry Sellers, we have slightly touched on this one, but did you want to ask anything on the back of your question? I can't see if Barry's here or not. I'm just conscious of running out of time, so just running through other questions. Anna Kirkham, you've asked here about recording of the presentation. Constance hasn't finished her research yet and her PhD, so we'll have a look at how much recording we can put online, Constance, won't we? After the meeting. But we can definitely, I think we can definitely make sure we have a list of all of the resources that everyone's mentioned, because there's some really great, some really lovely contributions from everyone that's joined the call as well. Adam Mealing, are you here? Would you like to ask your question or make a point?
Hi, yes, perhaps more amusing than a question. But it's, yeah, I'm coming at this from a planning policy point of view, so I don't quite have all the wonderful knowledge of architecture and everything you presented. That was really interesting. I think planning policy kind of has an issue in its local plans, which is more what I've worked with, in that it doesn't quite tackle equalities as well as it could. And design policies tend to sort of catch all everything under a term like sustainable high quality design. Does it seem more like realistically such documentation, or as wider as a broader approach, that sort of some sort of like equalities policy needs to come about with to try and put in people's mind like the importance of the built environment on such elements?
Yeah, I feel like that's something that's coming up more and more. Like as you mentioned, I think before it was under a big umbrella, like let's put everything into one box. And now I feel like some local authorities are really looking into that, into like creating more inclusive public spaces, more equality in terms of accessibility and access to children and women. So I think we're on the right path. But yeah. It's definitely something to look into, and I think it's not there yet across the whole country.
Yeah, I would agree with that. But thank you. It was very interesting and enforced the importance of this. So thank you very much.
Lovely stuff. Lots of comments and questions and points from Michael Fisher. I don't know, Michael, if you wanted to pose any of those or one of them at least.
Hi, yeah. I suppose my point is working in at Manchester City Council. We get a short window of funding to deliver some public realm, and it's very hard to sort of do all this lead-in design work. I think it's a bit of a challenge for us. So I think some of what's been mentioned today needs to be added into project briefs and funding objectives right from the start, and then that forces local authorities to show, how they've addressed what we've been talking about. And then I also did a quick question about lighting, because I know it literally gets dark, doesn't it, about 4 o'clock at winter. So it's you can design spaces as well as possible, but as soon as it gets dark, it becomes a different scenario. So I wonder if you had any comments on that.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a really good point as well. It's something I was really interested in, but the research environment made it difficult for me to conduct the research at night, both because I had to put together an ethic application to make sure my participants were safe and I was safe during the experiments. So yeah, I didn't do the experiment at night. I had to stick to daytime because of ethics considerations and safety considerations, but definitely. And it was really interesting because actually throughout all the interviews that were conducted during the day, I think lighting is one of the themes that came up the most often in the interviews, even if it was daytime. Like when I was asking women how safe do you feel in this space, most of them were instantly looking at trying to find street lamps or saying like, I think it would be bright enough at night, or I think there's no lighting, so I wouldn't feel safe at night. They were already like projecting themselves into the nighttime. So yeah, it's definitely something that came up and one of the key elements. But I feel for my research, I feel like that's something already known, that visibility and lighting is something that increase safety. It's kind of an easy fix for designers and planners. It's nothing groundbreaking. So that's why I didn't focus too much on that. I was trying to find like other characteristics of the built environment that could be changed to and that impact safety. But yeah, lighting is still very much relevant. And it was mentioned so many times.
Great stuff. So a couple of questions I think left. If we could do two more. Cameron, you have asked lots of excellent questions. If you want to try and ask one, I know your mic's not working properly. Please do if you'd like to ask one next. And then I think other questions, if we have then the last one from Laura Matza, if she's here. Cam, do you want to try? I don't know whether it's working. So, Laura, are you here? Would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, can hear you.
I think my question is quite similar to Cameron's one, actually. I wanted to ask if this study considered just women, cisgender women, or anyone identifying as a woman. And Cameron also asked about transgender individuals. And so that would be quite a different study maybe, but I wanted to know if this was included in the study or.
Yeah, so initially I was looking at women in general, so anyone qualifying as woman. The study context made that I only had cisgender women taking part in the study, but I think it's all relevant and it would have been relevant, but I did find some sort of intersectionality into my sample, even if they were all women. I could get like very different perceptions from the same groups. So yeah, it was really interesting how, I picked an age like, 18 to 35 woman, was expecting everyone to kind of feel the same, but like an interesting example was like most of the participants who were coming from London or from a European context were quite intimidating by tall buildings. They were saying that they weren't feeling comfortable next to tall buildings and etc. And then I had like a small sample of people from China who were coming from a background where they used to live in like really high rise, and for them it was like not an issue at all. And on the contrary, they felt really safe. So that shows that like even within a sample of like very similar cisgender women, you have like very different perceptions. So I think, yeah, it's just interesting to see the diversity within the same sample already. So yeah, I could have expanded. I didn't have the mean to all the time available to reach out to all the different groups. I spent a lot of time recruiting, leaving flyers and trying to reach out to community groups and stuff. But yeah, it's hard to convince people also to come out in the public realm and spend an hour with you of their own time. To follow like a stranger along a route. So yeah, there were some challenges and limitation into the recruitment, which made that, yeah, I had to recruit people mostly from my network or extended network or through people I knew. And yeah, had to do with the data I collected.
Thank you.
Brilliant stuff. Has anyone got one final burning question that they would like to ask of Constance? I've had some brilliant questions, but if anyone's got one and they want to shout out or put their hand up, please do. No, it looks like, oh, yes, we do. Lauren, over to you, the last question.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, I'm in a tent bag. I do have the question I posed on the chat, which is the elephant in the room is what are we women all afraid of? And it's men. I hate to say that, but this never enters into the discussion. And women's issues tend to be proposed in the third person. You know, she was attacked, she was raped, she was this. Don't say a man or a person did this to her. I would love to see that change. And I'm not really sure what my question is or whatever, but yeah, men are left out of this. The onus is all on women and planners. It doesn't seem fair. So,
Yeah, I mean that's a good point. That's something we all kind of tend to ignore, but it's there. But I think that's what I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. I think that the fact that the issue for women safety is mostly men is a social issue. So it's not something that urban design can fix. You can't just get men out of the equation and create cities just for women. So that's why I was saying that social change takes time. I think there are lots of things being done, education. There's mindsets are changing and hopefully we're going in the right direction. But yeah, for this research, I was looking at what can we do as designers or planners to actually make a change.
Fantastic, thank you. We are running over time, but I think just on behalf of everyone here and the Urban Design Group, Constance, it's been absolutely incredible. And you have clearly done a huge amount of work. Looks like it's going in an amazing direction, and thank you from all of us. I would just like to say, if anybody would like to continue to be a part of this conversation, if we were to start a working group or share resources, perhaps if you could pop your email address in the chat.
Sure.
That would be great.
Yeah. I wanted, thanks for having me, and thanks for all the really nice questions. It was a really interesting conversation.